Paraguay, officially the Republic of Paraguay, is a landlocked country in central South America, bordered by Argentina to the south and southwest, Brazil to the east and northeast, and Bolivia to the northwest. Paraguay lies on both banks of the Paraguay River, which runs through the center of the country from north to south. Due to its central location in South America, it is sometimes referred to as Corazón de Sudamérica. The indigenous Guarani had been living in Paraguay for at least a millennium before the Spanish conquered the territory in the 16th century. Spanish settlers and Jesuit missions introduced Christianity and Spanish culture to the region. Paraguay was a peripheral colony of the Spanish Empire, with few urban centers and settlers. Following independence from Spain in 1811, Paraguay was ruled by a series of dictators who generally implemented isolationist and protectionist policies. Following the disastrous Paraguayan War, the country lost 60 to 70% of its population through war and disease, and about 140,000 square kilometers of territory to Argentina and Brazil. Through the 20th century, Paraguay continued to endure a succession of authoritarian governments, culminating in the regime of Alfredo Stroessner, who led South America's longest-lived military dictatorship from 1954 to 1989. He was toppled in an internal military coup, and free multi-party elections were organized and held for the first time in 1993. A year later, Paraguay joined Argentina, Brazil and Uruguay to found Mercosur, a regional economic collaborative. As of 2009, Paraguay's population was estimated to be at around 6.5 million, most of whom are concentrated in the southeast region of the country. The capital and largest city is Asunción, of which the metropolitan area is home to nearly a third of Paraguay's population. In contrast to most Latin American nations, Paraguay's indigenous language and culture, Guarani, remains highly influential. In each census, residents predominantly identify as mestizo, reflecting years of intermarriage among the different ethnic groups. Guarani is recognized as an official language alongside Spanish, and both languages are widely spoken in the country. Etymology. The name of the river, Paraguay, is thought to come from Guarani, derived from para, of many varieties, and gua, riverine. There is no consensus for the derivation or meaning of the name Paraguay, although many versions are very similar. The most common interpretations include river which originates a sea. Fray Antonio Ruiz de Montoya said that it meant river crowned. The Spanish officer and scientist Félix de Rosara suggests two derivations. The Payaguas, referring to the Indian tribe who lived along the river, or a great chief named Paraguayo. The French-Argentine historian and writer Paul Groussac argued that it meant river that flows through the sea. The ex-president and Paraguayan politician Juan Natalicio González said it meant river of the habitants of the sea. History. Pre-Columbian era indigenous peoples inhabited this area for thousands of years. Pre-Columbian society in the region which is now Paraguay consisted of semi-nomadic tribes at the time of Spanish encounter. They were known for their warrior traditions. These indigenous tribes belonged to 5 distinct language families, which was the basis of their major divisions. Differing language groups were generally competitive over resources and territories. They were further divided into tribes by speaking languages in branches of these families. Today 17 separate ethno-linguistic groups remain. Colonization. The first Europeans in the area were Spanish explorers in 1516. The Spanish explorer Juan de Salazar de Espinosa founded the settlement of Asunción on 15 August 1537. The city eventually became the center of a Spanish colonial province of Paraguay, an attempt to create an autonomous Christian Indian nation. This was the center of the Jesuit missions and settlements in this part of South America in the 18th century, which included portions of Uruguay, Argentina, and Brazil. They developed Jesuit reductions to bring Indian populations together at Spanish missions and protect them from virtual slavery by Spanish settlers. In addition to seeking their conversion to Christianity, Catholicism in Paraguay was influenced by the indigenous peoples. The syncretic religion has absorbed native elements. The reducciones flourished in eastern Paraguay for about 150 years, until the expulsion of the Jesuits by the Spanish crown in 1767. The ruins of two 18th-century missions have been designated as World Heritage Sites by UNESCO. Independence from Spain. Paraguay overthrew the local Spanish administration on 14 May 1811. Paraguay's first ruler was the dictator José Gaspar Rodríguez de Francia. He ruled Paraguay from 1814 until his death in 1840, with very little outside contact or influence. He intended to create a utopian society based on the French theorist Jean-Jacques Rousseau's social contract. Rodríguez de Francia established new laws that reduced the powers of the church and the cabinet, forbade colonial citizens from marrying one another and allowed them to marry only blacks, mulattoes or natives, to create a mixed-race or mestizo society. He cut off relations between Paraguay and the rest of South America. Because of the Francia's restrictions on personal freedom, Fulgencio Yegros and several other military leaders and former politicians planned a coup d'état against him. De Francia discovered the plot and had its leaders either executed or imprisoned for life. After de Francia's death in 1840, Paraguay was ruled by various military officers under a new junta, until the secretary Carlos Antonio López, de Francia's nephew, declared himself dictator. López modernized Paraguay and opened it up to foreign commerce. He developed a non-aggression pact with Argentina and declared independence from the state in 1842. After López's death in 1862, power was transferred to his eldest son, Francisco Solano López. Paraguayan War. Solano López led the nation into the Paraguayan War in 1864. Paraguay fought against Brazil, Argentina and Uruguay, and was overwhelmingly defeated in 1870 after 5 years of the bloodiest war in South America. William D. Rubenstein wrote, "The normal estimate is that of a Paraguayan population of somewhere between 450,000 and 900,000, only 220,000 survived the war, of whom only 28,000 were adult males." Paraguay also suffered extensive territorial losses to Brazil and Argentina. During the pillaging of Asunción in 1869, the Brazilian Imperial Army packed up and transported the Paraguayan National Archives to Rio de Janeiro. Brazil's records from the war have remained classified. This has made Paraguayan history in the colonial and early national periods difficult to research and study. Since the war, the Colorado Party and Liberal Party maintain independent official versions of Paraguayan history. 20th century. Between 1904 and 1954, Paraguay had 31 presidents, most of whom were removed from office by force. In the 1930s, Paraguay fought the Chaco War against Bolivia, in part to try to reclaim some of the land lost. It defeated Bolivia and re-established sovereignty over the region called the Chaco. It forfeited additional territorial gains in the Mato Grosso as a price of peace. After World War II, politics became particularly unstable, with several political parties fighting for power in the late 1940s, which most notably brought about the Paraguayan Civil War of 1947. A series of unstable governments ensued until the establishment, in 1954, of the stable regime of dictator Alfredo Stroessner, who remained in office for more than 3 decades, until 1989. Paraguay was modernized to some extent under Stroessner's regime, although his rule was marked by extensive abuses. Stroessner and the Colorado Party ruled the country from 1954 to 1989. The dictator oversaw an era of economic expansion, but also had a poor human rights and environmental record. Torture and death for political opponents was routine. After his overthrow, the Colorado continued to dominate national politics until 2008. Post-1989, the splits in the Colorado Party in the 1980s, and the prevailing conditions, Stroessner's advanced age, the character of the regime, the economic downturn, and international isolation, were catalysts for anti-regime demonstrations and statements by the opposition prior to the 1988 general elections. PLRA leader Domingo Lino served as the focal point of the opposition in the second half of the 1980s. The government's effort to isolate Lino by exiling him in 1982 had backfired. On his sixth attempt to re-enter the country in 1986, Lino returned with 3 television crews from the U.S., a former United States ambassador to Paraguay, and a group of Uruguayan and Argentine congressmen. Despite the international contingent, the police violently barred Lino's return. The Stroessner regime relented in April 1987, and permitted Lino to return to Asunción. Lino took the lead in organizing demonstrations and reducing infighting among the opposition party. The opposition was unable to reach agreement on a common strategy regarding the elections, with some parties advocating abstention, and others calling for blank voting. The parties held numerous lightning demonstrations, especially in rural areas. Such demonstrations were gathered and quickly disbanded before the arrival of the police. In response to the upsurge in opposition activities, Stroessner condemned the accord for advocating sabotage of the general elections and disrespect of the law. He used national police and civilian vigilantes of the Colorado Party to break up demonstrations. A number of opposition leaders were imprisoned or otherwise harassed. Hermes Rafael Saguier, another key leader of the PLRA, was imprisoned for 4 months in 1987 on charges of sedition. In early February 1988, police arrested 200 people attending a National Coordinating Committee meeting in Coronel Oviedo. Lino and several other opposition figures were arrested before dawn on the day of the election, the 14th of February, and held for 12 hours. The government declared Stroessner's re-election with 89% of the vote. The opposition attributed the results in part to the virtual Colorado monopoly on the mass media. They noted that 53% of those polled indicated that there was an uneasiness in Paraguayan society. 74% believed that the political situation needed changes, including 45% who wanted a substantial or total change. Finally, 31% stated that they planned to abstain from voting in the February elections. On 3 February 1989, Stroessner was overthrown in a military coup headed by General Andrés Rodríguez. As president, Rodríguez instituted political, legal, and economic reforms and initiated a rapprochement with the international community, reflecting the deep hunger of the rural poor for land. Hundreds immediately occupied thousands of acres of unused territories belonging to Stroessner and his associates. By mid-1990, 19,000 families occupied 340,000 acres. At the time, 2.06 million people lived in rural areas, more than half of the 4.1 million total population, and most were landless. The June 1992 Constitution established a democratic system of government and dramatically improved protection of fundamental human rights. In May 1993, Colorado Party candidate Juan Carlos Wasmosy was elected as Paraguay's first civilian president in almost 40 years, in what international observers deemed fair and free elections. With support from the United States, the Organization of American States, and other countries in the region, the Paraguayan people rejected an April 1996 attempt by then Army Chief General Lino Oviedo to oust President Wasmosy. Oviedo was nominated as the Colorado candidate for president in the 1998 election. However, his former running mate, Raul Cubas, became the Colorado Party's candidate, and was elected in May in elections deemed by international observers to be free and fair. One of Cuba's first acts after taking office in August was to commute Oviedo's sentence and release him. In December 1998, Paraguay's Supreme Court declared these actions unconstitutional. In this tense atmosphere, the murder of Vice President and longtime Oviedo rival Luis Maria Argana on 23 March 1999, led the Chamber of Deputies to impeach Cubas the next day. On 26 March, 8 student anti-government demonstrators were murdered, widely believed to have been carried out by Oviedo supporters. This increased opposition to Cubas, who resigned on 28 March. Senate President Luis González Macchi, a Cuba's opponent, was peacefully sworn in as president the same day. In 2003, Nicanor Duarte Frutos was elected as president. For the 2008 general elections, the Colorado Party was favored in polls. Their candidate was Minister of Education Blanca Ovalar, the first woman to be nominated as a candidate for a major party in Paraguayan history. He had long followed liberation theology, which was controversial in South American societies, but he was backed by the center-right Liberal Party, the Colorado Party's traditional opponents. From Lugo's 2008 election to his 2012 impeachment, Lugo achieved a historic victory in Paraguay's presidential election, defeating the ruling party candidate, and ending 61 years of conservative rule. Lugo won with nearly 41% of the vote, compared to almost 31% for Blanca Ovalar of the Colorado Party. Outgoing President Nicanor Duarte Frutos hailed the moment as the first time in the history of the nation that a government had transferred power to opposition forces in a constitutional and peaceful fashion. Lugo was sworn in on 15 August 2008. The Paraguayan Congress continued to be dominated by right-wing elected officials. The Lugo administration set its two major priorities as the reduction of corruption and economic inequality. Political instability following Lugo's election and disputes within his cabinet encouraged some renewal of popular support for the Colorado Party. Reports suggested that the businessman Horacio Cartes became the new political figure amid disputes. Despite the U.S. Drug Enforcement Administration's strong accusations against Cartes related to drug trafficking, he continued to amass followers in the political arena. On 14 January 2011, the Colorado Party convention nominated Horacio Cartes as the presidential candidate for the party. However, the party's constitution didn't allow it. On 21 June 2012, impeachment proceedings against President Lugo began in the country's lower house, which was controlled by his opponents. Lugo was given less than 24 hours to prepare for the proceedings and only 2 hours in which to mount a defense. Impeachment was quickly approved and the resulting trial in Paraguay's Senate, also controlled by the opposition, ended with the removal of Lugo from office and Vice President Federico Franco assuming the duties of president. Lugo's rivals blamed him for the deaths of 17 people, 8 police officers and 9 farmers, in armed clashes after police were ambushed by armed peasants when enforcing an eviction order against rural trespassers. Lugo's supporters gathered outside Congress to protest the decision as a politically motivated coup d'état. Lugo's removal from office on the 22nd of June 2012 is considered by UNASUR and other neighboring countries, especially those currently governed by leftist leaders, as a coup d'état. The Organization of American States, which sent a mission to Paraguay to gather information, concluded that the impeachment process had been carried out in accordance with the Constitution of Paraguay. Geography. Paraguay is divided by the Rio Paraguay into two well-differentiated geographic regions. The Eastern Region, and the Western Region, officially called Western Paraguay and also known as the Chaco, which is part of the Gran Chaco. The country lies between latitudes 19 degrees and 28 degrees south, and longitudes 54 degrees and 63 degrees west. The terrain consists mostly of grassy plains and wooded hills in the Eastern Region. To the west are mostly low, marshy plains. Climate: the overall climate is tropical to subtropical. Like most lands in the region, Paraguay has only wet and dry periods. Winds play a major role in influencing Paraguay's weather. Between October and March, warm winds blow from the Amazon basin in the north, while the period between May and August brings cold winds from the Andes. The absence of mountain ranges to provide a natural barrier allows winds to develop speeds as high as 161 km per hour. This also leads to significant changes in temperature within a short span of time. Between April and September, temperatures will sometimes drop below freezing. January is the hottest summer month, with an average daily temperature of 28.9 degrees Celsius. Rainfall varies dramatically across the country, with substantial rainfall in the eastern portions, and semi-arid conditions in the far west. The Far Eastern Forest Belt receives an average of 170 centimeters of rain annually, while the Western Chaco region typically averages no more than 50 centimeters a year. The rains in the west tend to be irregular and evaporate quickly, contributing to the aridity of the area. Government and politics. Paraguay is a representative democratic republic, with a multi-party system and separation of powers in three branches. Executive power is exercised solely by the president, who is head of state and head of government. Legislative power is vested in the two chambers of the National Congress. The judiciary is vested on tribunals and courts of civil law and a 9-member Supreme Court of Justice, all of them independent of the executive and the legislature. Military. The military of Paraguay consists of the Paraguayan Army, Navy and Air Force. The Constitution of Paraguay establishes the President of Paraguay as the Commander-in-Chief. Paraguay has compulsory military service, and all 18-year-old males and 17-year-olds in the year of their 18th birthday are liable for 1 year of active duty. Although the 1992 Constitution allows for conscientious objection, no enabling legislation has yet been approved. In July 2005, military aid in the form of U.S. Special Forces began arriving at Paraguay's Mariscal Estigarribia Air Base, a sprawling complex built in 1982. Administrative subdivisions. Paraguay consists of 17 departments and 1 capital district. It is also divided into 2 regions, the Occidental Region, or Chaco, and the Oriental Region. These are the departments, with their capitals, population, area and the number of districts. Alto Paraguay, Boquerón, Presidente Hayes, Amambay, Concepción, San Pedro Distrito, Capital Guairaca, Zapar, Alto Parana, Caguazú, Canindeyú, Itapúa, Paraguay, Misiones, Nimbucú, Cordillera, Central Brazil, Bolivia, Argentina. The departments are further divided into districts.